Hello, good evening, good afternoon, and good morning, wherever you are. So, welcome to Connect Africa. So, we are here at the end of the week on Friday night to give you analysis. Here, my echo. Sorry about that. Yeah. Uh, tonight we are going to discuss, what happened as the peace agreement between the Saudi Arabia and Iran, which is led by China. And what does that mean? I mean, the world has been talking about it, its implication. What does it mean globally in the region? So, as we do, here usually we try to give analysis from the Pan-African perspective. So that's what we are going to do. As usual, we are joined by our family member here, Kwame Gonza. Welcome, Kwame, again.
Thank you very much, Malet. Can you hear me well?
Very well, loud and clear. We hear you. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much. Thank you for organizing the program so that we can see how these events that are happening across the globe, events are unfolding rapidly, even, faster than we expected. In most cases, because some things we have just they look like we have just spoken about them, and the next day they happen.
Yeah,
So sometimes, yeah, they make us look like we are prophets who are predicting things which are going to happen. So
exactly.
things are really unfolding faster than we expected, actually. Starting 2020, we spoke about a lot of things. There's a lot of shift that is going on across the globe when it comes to power. And we started mentioning, on at this channel, on this channel here, we started mentioning these things. Starting 2020, we started calling out certain things, especially when we saw, things like the COVID which happened, and we saw the power which China had come with its tech industry. The voting of Trump. Then we saw the chaos which Britain was going through, the resignation of Prime Minister in Cameroon. Cameroon Prime Minister in Britain, Cameroon, and then Theresa May came and she resigned, and then Boris Johnson came and then he resigned, and then we saw another woman who came after Boris Johnson. I think she was called, I've forgotten her name because she was there briefly. Then we have Sunak right now. So we saw these events, we saw Brexit. All these were signifying something. And actually, this started about 10 years ago, if you look carefully, with the economic depression that happened in 2008. So there is events there which unfolded. But even as an African, because today we are looking at, first of all, the implication of the rise of China, because
Let me,
the peace agreement. Okay.
Yeah, no, sorry. So please, those of you, sorry to, I didn't mean to cut you, but just before you dive in it, I wanted to do this introduction or or announcement for our audience. Please, as you tune in here, we have I'm going to put quickly a petition that needs to be signed. We will explain later on, but when you see it, you'll see it's a Pan-Africanism. It's a call for unity, 3 petitions. So as you tune in, please go and sign those petitions and share with your network, with your friends, with your family, because that will help us, to reach what needs to be achieved with that petition. Kwame, let me just have some I will throw some questions. So with your analysis, I appreciate if you can touch on that as well. So Iran and Saudi Arabia, they have like a 7 years adversity, which has been escalated by media. And this has been just, a peace deal has been brokered by China. as to use your own word actually, or your own words, there's a chief, a new chief in town. That's how. So the world better watch out. The Chinese officials on their side, this has three significance. So as they put it, one is, there's no it's not only one chaos or one crisis in the world, which is, where the West is focusing purposely on Ukraine and Russia, but also there's another chaos that needs to be addressed, conflicts like this. The second one, significance, what the Chinese officials, who are part of that peace deal, where is that the power of dialogue, no matter how things seem complicated. And the third and important, what they said is, the fate of the Middle East needs to be left for the Middle East. I'm sure this has a message again, for those who are or who have been dominant in that region. But of course, different analysts have interpreted this in different ways. Those who say this is a slap for those who have been in power or in dominant, like for your US and Israel in the region. And then some say also it's a diplomatic coup by China, but in a positive way. But then the other one is, this has nothing, China's interest is purely money. That's all that they are after. So is that really true? Is it really about money or the petrodollar thing, or China really saw this just peacemaking? What is it really, and how does this will impact uh, gl- on Africa, as we are discussing things, from the Pan-African perspective and globally, because certainly what happens in the world will also impact us. Back to you, Kwame.
Yeah. Thank you, Malet, very much for breaking it down a little bit. Uh, and as I was saying, these events that have happened is they have lot of been like they have sort of been like a chain. Okay, there's been a chain of events, but that chain, in the process of moving, it has moved faster. The rolling has been even faster than we expected. The chain was moving when we started speaking about these things a few years ago, but now it looks like it has even started moving faster. That chain has started moving faster. And one of those things which we pointed out in the past, and which of course everyone else has been mentioning, is the rise of China as an economy, because we saw that during the rise of China, there's been a lot of industrialization in China, and this industrialization actually has also been reflected, or it has spilled over to a certain extent into Africa, because Africa sells a lot of commodity. If you take carefully data and examine data, you would see that in the past 10 years, Africa has had some of the fastest growing economies in the world. And that is simply because there has been rapid, growth in China. And China has been linked to Africa in that way, that China has been buying a lot of commodities, to a larger extent. China has been doing trade with Africa at in a much favorable way compared to the West, and what it has been doing for the last 600 years or 500 years. It has been in contact with the African continent. Now when we talk about the relationship between China and the United States and the West, their relationship with Africa, comparing it, I think that is for another day, because that needs a full program. I will not touch on that, but I just wanted to make that point there, so that we can understand. Now, when we come to that growth, that economic growth, China has grown rapidly, even beyond everyone's expectation, to the point that today you see that China, if you are talking about purchasing power, China's economy is bigger than the United States economy. China's economy right now, if we are considering purchasing power, is around $30 trillion. 30 trillion. and the United States is just $21 trillion. So the United States is terrified when it comes to this, point. It is very terrified of how rapid China, has grown. It has a bigger population. Now it is the major manufacturer, in the world, is the manufacturing center of the world. And so everywhere China goes now has become a threat, sort of, to, every move which China makes has sort of become a threat to the United States. That is at least how they put it, even though it is not a threat in the normal sense of it. But that is how the words are spinned in the United States media, in the United States society, and mainstream media, mainstream society, because their narrative is shaped, in Washington and the Pentagon, and then they give it to the media, even though they claim that they have separation of powers and separation of responsibilities, media and civil society, and then legislature and government and stuff like that, even though they claim that. But when you look carefully, you don't see, there's no really clear line. That line is really blurred. So that is at least the narrative that is being spinned, in their mainstream society, that China is a threat. So they see every move which China makes as a threat, and we have seen that even, in the past. As Pan-Africanists, we want to focus on Africa. That when China has been in Africa and Africa has been growing, the economic growth in China has spilled over in Africa, not only in Africa but even in Asia. In Asia, when we are talking about the Asian tigers, the countries around China, they have been able to test, of this prosperity, the rapid prosperity that has come to China. So the United States, to a larger extent, started a war on China in Africa. You have heard of the debt. China is overburdening Africa with debt. But when actually the facts are otherwise, when you look at the figures, when you look at Africa's debt, majority of the debt in Africa is actually held by the Western world. The China holds only about 12% of the debt in Africa. Majority, the biggest chunk of debt, the group which has been loading Africa with debt and burdening Africa with debt and robbing Africa, is actually the Western world, the IMF and World Bank. They are the ones who have been loading Africa, even to date. So, but they have been spinning this false narrative even around the African continent. And it is unfortunate that even some of the African heads of state and intellectuals and media, they pick up this false narrative, and they claim that China is overburdening Africa with it. But they don't also tell you that the United States is so much indebted to China. They don't tell you this. So it is all aimed at tarnishing this relationship between Africa, confusing between Africa and China, and confusing the Africans, so that the Africans will not concentrate on what is good for them. So that, I just wanted to lay a background of that, so that we can get it out of the way. Now, you mentioned what are the implications of China's moves, or what you termed a diplomatic coup in the Middle East, whereby it championed this peace agreement between two countries that have been at each other's throat for a very long time, that they have been having this adversarial relationship for a very long time, and that is Saudi Arabia and Iran. This like you rightly said, has been looked at as, it came as a shock within the walls of power, within the corridors of power in Washington and even in the European capitals. But China, it is because China majorly works behind the scenes. China normally plays the long game. You see, they don't play 5 years, 4 years. They always play the long game. And when you look at their civilization, uh, because they also, say, they claim that they are one of the, they are the longest continuing civilization, with, I think, about 4,000, 3,000, 4,000 years of civilization. So they are the longest continuing civilization. the Chinese. So they play a very long game, and they have a very organized political structure. And this information you can get it by reading even some of the works from people like the diplomat Kishore Mahbubani, and a lot of other experts on China and how China plays. So China has been working in the background on this relationship between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and it has not alienated any one of them. Now, what interest does China have in this region? Of course, any country would have interests. Even we as Africans, if we go wherever we go, whether it is the Middle East, whether we go to India Africa Summit, Europe Africa Summit, US Africa Summit, we have some interests. Okay, even though our leaders sometimes are looked at as dumb and stuff like that, as if they don't know what they want, but still they go because they have some interest. So in the same way, China, in brokering this relationship, it has interests. Of course, it depends on the energy. A lot of energy, I think about more than 15% of its energy comes from the Middle East, okay, from Saudi Arabia and Iran. Okay, it has projects with Iran. For example, it has a $400 billion 25-year cooperation plan, industrial plan with Iran. For example, $400 billion over 25 years they're going to invest and cooperate with Iran on those deals which were signed. And when you go to Saudi Arabia, they get majority of their energy resources from Saudi Arabia. So these are interests for China. But on top of that, China is closer to the Middle East than the United States. Okay, so China would have so much interest in this region to be stable. It needs this region to be stable. And on top of that, there is the Silk, the Belt and Road Initiative, or the old Silk Road, the Belt and Road Initiative. So China is interested in boosting investing in this, investment in this area, to create prosperity, or even to tap into the prosperity which is in Saudi Arabia and some of the Middle Eastern countries. But it is also, China is also interested in growing prosperity so that it can in turn get markets. Unlike the Western world, which thinks that the only way is to take over the markets, impoverish the people, and then create a middle class, and then sell them your products which you are manufacturing from the metropolis, from the Western world. China wants to create prosperity for all, for everyone, and then it will get a market in turn for that product. And that is why China always emphasizes the idea of non-interference in the political affairs of states. Let states conduct their own affairs. They know what they want. And this has been emphasized again and again. But because China doesn't have the same media conglomerates like the West, media organizations, to parrot its narrative like how the West does, then you see that our people, and majority of the people who are not in China but within the web of the Western world, the control of the web of the Western world, they end up swallowing this negative narrative. So China has interests, Silk Road, the energy, but it also wants this region to be stable. Now, China is also has interests of looking good in the region, of course, looking at the mistakes, because China is capitalizing on the mistakes which the United States has done in the region. These Arabs also, Iran and Saudi Arabia, they are also tired because Europeans and these Western people always thrive on divide and conquer. So they are always speaking in one person's ear and then, demonizing him against the other. Like they would be on the side of Saudi Arabia and they would demonize Iran. Okay. But this is something which they play just to, because they think this is the only way they thrive. That is how for them they think they can achieve their objectives. And if you look at in the 1980s, I think 1980s, the beginning, the emergence of the 1980s, the start of 1980s, there was a war between Iraq and Iran, you see that they were supporting one side, and when they were supporting one side and selling it weapons, Iraq and Iran, they engaged in a very dangerous war, very almost deadly war. And but in turn, they were supporting Iraq, but they turned around again and attacked Iraq and destroyed the country. So they caused confusion within the region. And I feel like the Arabs are tired of this kind of, approach within the region. So that is why you see that they have been able to welcome, China. The other thing is that the Arabs themselves have seen that the United States has become very arrogant, in its use of power. Like you see, Biden, when he was coming to power, is going to make Saudi Arabia a pariah state. They already have animosity with Iran, and this is how they were speaking to Iran. And he thought that he would come around and boss Saudi Arabia around and say increase the fuel, which they refused, which Mohammed bin Salman refused. They refused to to pump out more oil because they were thinking that the prices of oil are so high, and Russia was making a lot of money. So they refused these advances. Now, China has come to capitalize on all these weaknesses, the war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan. So China has come to capitalize on this. There's a thirst in the region for, peace. There's a thirst, there's a lot of thirst in the region for stability and peace, regardless of the differences, which of course Saudi Arabia may have with countries like Yemen, for example, where Saudi Arabia is carrying out a war. But there is, some thirst for peace and stability in the region. So then that means China is exploiting that gap. China is exploiting that, not in a negative way, but he's exploiting to rehabilitate itself, within the region, because the West has been demonizing everyone in the region. In that case, it has been demonizing, of course, China. When you, like we said, when you look at their media houses, that this is what they are doing. So China has been able to exploit that gap excellently well. So so we see that it shocked them, because they don't take time to reflect, and they don't play the long game like how China has been playing. Now, this has consequences in the region, huge consequences in the region. Like we said, a new player is in town now, and we see that they are already rolled out to the carpet. And even in the past, you see the President Xi Jinping, when he visited Saudi Arabia, carpet was rolled out for him, and huge, celebrations, and a lot, they gave him a lot of respect compared to Biden, when Biden came, to Saudi Arabia. That there was a lot of pomp, there was a lot of, welcome, I think 21 gun salute, to him. So you can see that there is a new player in town, and that is China. Actually, news also came out a few hours ago that after this deal, Saudi Arabia has expressed interest in normalizing or settling and having a negotiation, with the Houthi rebels in Yemen, where it has been bombing, and they agreed actually with Iran that Iran will stop, supplying weapons to the Houthi rebels in Yemen. So you can see that China, he's making an attempt, a serious attempt, at peace. Now, how does this affect the African continent? It affects the African continent in that the war which happened in Iraq and Afghanistan, we saw that it spilled over into, Africa through, Libya, when they destroyed the government in Libya. These the NATO, the United States, and this group of colonialists, they destroyed Libya. We saw that the war and ISIS and terrorists who were in the Middle East, which of course the United States caused, that war spilled over into the continent. Those rebels, they spilled over into the continent, and they moved all the way to Burkina Faso, Ivory Coast, and now we hear them, we hear that instability and rebels, in Mozambique, where actually Rwanda is there, and South Africa helping the government in Mozambique to fight. So we see that if China comes into the region, there is likely to be stability in the region. At least, we can say there's going to be relative stability. They may not be fully, the coming back of stability, but there may be relative stability in the region, and this is likely to reflect also, into the African continent, because most of the instability now that has been bothering the northern part of the African continent and the Sahel, all the way, to areas like Burkina Faso, where they are battling those insurgents, and all the way to Mozambique, we are likely to get a little bit of relief. And of course, the United States will start fighting back. Will start fighting back because this is an enterprise. This is an enterprise for the United States, that it uses this instability, which it is sowing all over, to exploit the resources of other people, like what we are seeing in Syria, that the United States has been stealing Syria's oil. This has been published, broad daylight. They have published it. The United States is stealing Syria's oil. So it uses this chaos which it is sowing all over to exploit other people's resources and go back and build, itself, and build Europe, and build the United States, build New Zealand, build, Canada, build Australia. This is how these capitalists, majorly who are Anglo-Saxons, how they are operating in robbing the world. So Africa is likely to get some relief, from that instability. When we get peace in the Middle East, there's likely to be, also that peace spilling over into the African continent. That is number one. Also, Africa, with our newfound narrative of African solutions, also we see that narrative might give us a little bit more confidence. We might develop, we might get another injection of confidence, or into our narrative of African solutions, as we saw that, for example, Blinken, because China has not gone out of Africa, even though it has been demonized for a very long time. As we saw that when Blinken left Ethiopia, immediately, a representative of the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs also arrived, to see that he enforces. Yeah. So you see that China has also not left, the region. So our confidence also is likely to be boosted. The confidence of the African leaders is likely to be boosted, because no one wants to throw in their towel, with someone who's losing, with a country or with a civilization they see that is declining. Because this is a sign, the ability of China to bring peace in this region is going to be seen across the globe as a sign, is going to be seen as a sign that the United States is declining and is accelerating, actually, because many people have already seen that it's declining, but rather it's going to be seen as a sign of the acceleration of that decline. That is what is going to happen, that now Africans, we are going to develop a new sense, of another injection. We are going to get another injection of confidence, so that we can hold up our narrative of African solutions to African problems. And we saw this even when Blinken came to Ethiopia, that he was also trying to parrot what we have been saying while they have been fighting against us when we are saying African solutions to African problems. But this is because they have become desperate. The Western world now has become desperate. So now he has started parroting our own narrative, which we have been saying while they are fighting us, to overthrow the government in Addis Ababa. So this is what I see that is going to happen. This is what is going to be reflected. But also one more thing which I had not added was the issue of Israel, that the African Union stood up against Israel recently. But when you look at critically, actually that ties in very well with this event that is happening, that the Africans have gained a level of confidence, because Africans know very well that Israel is a very close ally of the United States, but they were not terrified, they were not scared to throw out Israel. So it shows you that Africans have gained a certain level of confidence in their approach, because they know that with this move now, confirmed that China is in the region, has come in the region to stabilize the region, Israel has to get its act together. Israel has to stop, terrorizing and killing the people in Palestine. It has to stop occupying. So it is going to reflect in that way that Israel itself also will have to sit up and start behaving very well in the region. It start behaving, like a civilized state in the region, instead of acting like an apartheid, state. Because Africa is one of the few, it has been a long supporter of the Palestinian people, and it has been a long supporter when you look at the position of the African Union and the other African heads of state, majority of the African heads of state. Their insistence has been a two-state solution, and not Israel to go in and run in and kill innocent people, kill babies, kill women, kill the elderly, kill, disabled people all over and occupy the region. So Israel will have to sit up. And I think that Africa is going to reinforce in that regard its position on Israel, is going to insist. And I think that Israel, whether it wants or not, the cards now have turned against it, because it has been, for a long time, Israel has been propped up by the United States and Europe, and they have not been paying any attention to what Israel has been doing in the region. They have, closed their eyes to the actions of the Israeli state, of the Zionist state of Israel, and it has been doing whatever it wants, kill whatever you want, kill whomever you want, kill the children, kill the women, kill the elderly, kill the cripples, just kill everything you want. And I think that is going to come to an end. And Africa, I think, is going to reinforce also its position. Is going to reinforce its position on that issue of Israel and Palestine conflict. So that is all I can say on this issue of China's move in the Middle East and brokering that relationship, that agreement between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Unless, Malet, you have anything you want to add, how you look at it from your point of view.
Thank you, Kwame. Really, you have analyzed it, yeah, very well. I will just try to say something, departing from what you said. Those figures that China having a small percentage of the Africa debt, and it's actually the Western countries or Western institutions or those so-called international institutions, the majority of the debts that have been holding Africa. It is, I think, the biggest weapon that the neo-colonizers have, or the West have, against Africa is our own ignorance. I mean, how many of us are really aware of about these facts? All we have to do is read. I mean, it's just in our palm. As you said in the beginning, was it off the record? I think, like we Africans are busy TikToking, instead of doing the real business and creating awareness and learning. So because we tried to look at, to assess some of the news, what have been said, I've been trying to get from the South African broadcast and others. There was no really real analysis except just the global impact that has been given or written when it comes to Africa. What does it mean? So yeah, we need to stop being busy with unnecessary, because we don't have time. So we really need to do our own research. Another thing is a key point that you said China is capitalizing on the mistakes of US. It's indeed, yeah, it's very true. I myself asked you, a question in the beginning. Many say that it's purely about money. It's purely about interest, strategic interest by China that, that pushed or motivated China to make peace between these two Western Asia countries. But who is not? Who is not really after interests? I mean, everybody's, as you said it very well and analyzed it very well, everybody's after its own interest. But there is one simple equation and answer. There are those countries, or who is the country who is interested in bringing peace between two countries, and who is the country who is interested causing unrest between two countries or within a country by weaponizing and sponsoring rebels. So I don't have to answer and name states or countries here, but we all know who is interested in peace, whether that is even after regarding interest related to their interest, and who is interested in causing conflicts and profiting from that. So those are facts that we need to look at it. um, Moving forward, our second part of the discussion for tonight is last time in the beginning of this week we discussed, Blinken's arrival, or in the middle of the week, actually, Blinken's arrival in Ethiopia for the first time. I mean, he has been in the continent 2 times to mobilize countries against Ethiopia. It didn't work. Now, on the third time, he came, I think, quite symbolic after the peace deal, or we can also say he has no option but to talk to the government of Ethiopia, as he should have been, or it should have been also earlier. But since our focus was mainly on Blinken, and by bringing the last two trips that he has done in 2021, 2022, and 2023 now, we did not touch other, tours, a number of, actually a series of tours or invoice that has been sent by the Biden administration to Africa. I mean, from the Secretary of State or from the Foreign Affairs Minister, we can call it, to the Secretary of Treasury, to Samantha Power, and then also the First Lady recently have been in Kenya, a number of them. And I think there's a new one also. The Vice President is now planning to come to Africa. I mean, they are just desperate. I mean, even without really, getting into it so deep, you can say, I mean, there's some they're desperate. So yeah, just walk us through it. What caused all these trips? What is it US after? I mean, there are some obvious reasons, but why this match?
Yeah, thank you, Malit. What we are seeing, like you rightly mentioned, uh, Blinken, Secretary of State Blinken, is frequent visits to Africa. In the last 2 years, more than 3 visits on the continent. Uh, and then we see that he visited South Africa. Of course, all these visits, which are the challenges, which were very challenging for the United States in that even when Secretary Blinken gave his maiden speech in South Africa in Pretoria, which he called President Biden's strategy towards Africa, that Africa was not looked at as something. The speech was looked at as empty because it did not have any serious content that we should look at. There was no really serious, tangible substance that we as Africans can look at and say, he has brought something new on the table, apart from the old narrative of trying to lecture Africans on what to do. And of course, we saw people like Madame Naleda Pandor, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of South Africa, pushing back that we don't want to be told what to do, which she made, which she did this, in broad daylight, in open, during a media press conference. So he has visited the continent, you know, repeatedly, and we saw him, and then we saw that the U.S. Africa summit happened. The U.S. Africa summit happened, to which Biden and his group and the United States tried to re-engage. He tried to make it as if he's an NGO meeting or some some sort of circus, whereby they are engaging in ceremonial, speeches and praising themselves, what they have done, and how they are, you know, how they have a big relationship with Africa. They are really ready to re-engage with Africa. How they are rehabilitating, themselves before Africa. But we see all these that they are actually copying to a larger extent. They are just copying what China has been doing, with Africa. The relationship with which China has been having with Africa. That China respects everyone, regardless of who you are, how small, whether you are Togo, whether you are South Africa. China, when you come, they pay you the same respect. Unlike the Anglo-Saxon, the Western people, they look down on Africans, as Madame, Chiombori Kwao, Ambassador Chiombori Kwao, the former AU, ambassador to the United States, rightly mentioned it, that these people, they are racist. They don't respect Africans. They don't even have an agenda when they are calling the U.S. Africa summit. So they did that summit, and they made, of course, promises which are about $55 million, which is in itself is laughable, that it was even criticized by by some of the prominent Pan-Africans, like Hamila Aragawi, the activist in the United States. And then even the African heads of state themselves, I think they see it, that you are spending in 1 week $40 billion on a war, on an unjustified war in Ukraine, and you are telling Africa that we will have a relationship with you, a whole continent of 1.5 billion people, and you are telling us we will have a relationship with you for the next 300 years, and that relationship we are going to inject in, which is meant to build, we are meant to build this relationship and build infrastructure. And you are injecting in $55 million, but you are injecting in 1 week. You are injecting $40 billion, and in building and up, bringing up lives and improving people's lives, you are putting in $55 billion in 3 years. So it makes it laughable that even the African heads of state themselves, I think, they understand it. So the United States on the continent in itself has become an entity which has to be accommodated. It's sort of like it is an entity which has, its diplomats now tolerated. Now we just have to tolerate them, because now they have become like a spoiled child. You see, when you have a spoiled child, then you just have to accommodate the child, because it is your child. Now you have to know how to deal with this spoiled child. So that is how the United States, has become that, regardless now of the trips it makes to Africa, the intentions of the United States are already known. So we see that Blinken made his visit, recently. But when he had finished his second visit, we saw Janet Yellen, the Secretary of State of the United States, also making visits, to Africa. I think she went to South Africa. Then we saw Jill Biden, who is the wife, the first lady of the United States, the wife to President Biden, also coming and visiting Kenya. And then, we saw Blinken now coming back again. And now we are seeing also Kamara Harris, also she's coming to Ghana, Zambia, and then we are seeing that after Kamara Harris, then Biden also will come. So the visits in themselves, they are not bad, but if these visits were backed up by substantial, agendas, then we would welcome them as Africans. But throughout history, we have sifted through our relationship. We have sifted through, our cooperation with the United States. We have sifted even through the data, all the data, and we have seen that the agenda and the intentions of the United States and all of the Europeans, they are
Mhm.
negative. If you look at the data, you know, instead of improving improving the trade between ourselves, they are concentrating on, unsubstantial things, things which lack substance, like countering Russia maligning, countering Russia malignment in Africa, passing a bill in Congress, HR 7311, that they are trying to counter Russia. This is not what they should be concentrating on. They should be concentrating on improving its relationship, their relationship with Africa through trade. Their trade is a mere $63 billion, all of them together combined with Europe. China's trade with Africa is more than 200 billion dollars, $260 billion. So it's just common sense that Africans will gravitate towards China, because this is not an age of saviorship that Africans are looking for someone to save them.
Mhm.
The Africans are not looking for someone to come and teach them human rights. We have fought for human rights more than anyone in history on this continent, from slavery, from colonialism. So how a colonialist and someone who has been violating our rights stands around and be the same person who's teaching us, human rights? I think the Africans have become more smart, to these kind of sinister schemes. And this is where I think that the United States is losing. And that takes us back to the same, argument that we were making, even about the Middle East in the first question, that China is winning in the Middle East because of the mistakes of the United States in the Middle East. It
Mhm.
went there and is trying to stabilize. And what is next is that it is going to continue to watch that the United States will continue to make mistakes, even in Africa, and China will come and capitalize. Because China, remember, is all through, whether it is the investments that have been happening on the African continent, China has been capitalizing on the mistakes of the Western world. They don't want to invest in Africa. They want to just exploit the African continent and then feed us with empty narratives about human rights. And yet we know about human rights more than them. We don't need them to come and tell us
Yeah.
about human rights. We don't need them to convert us into anything. But they are stuck into this, false superiority that they're supposed to teach anyone across the world. Who doesn't need it? They think that they are supposed to teach Africans anything, and yet the Africans don't need it. They really don't need it. And they have sort of refused to change. And China is going to continue to capitalize on these mistakes, regardless of whether they want to start a war, whether they start a war with China. I think China will continue to capitalize on these mistakes. So whether they pay 1,000 visits onto the African continent, I think the African people themselves have already realized. And when a poll was taken and sentiment, African people's sentiment was measured to understand which country they favor between China and the United States. Actually, majority of the African people, they said they favor China. And this is no accident.
Mhm.
And it is interesting that the United States and the Western world cannot learn from all these and think that people are going to continue to be stupid, and be foolish, that they don't understand what they want. They don't understand. We don't understand our interests. I mean, it is ironic. I don't know whether they think that they will use brutality, which is not, feasible. That people cannot let this continue to stand. So whether they visit with the whole entourage of the United States government, they close down the government and bring it to the African continent, I think it will not change anything unless the United States increases its trade and the whole Western world increases, concentrates on the things which matter to Africans. Things like trade, which we have been saying for a very long time on the African continent. We have been telling them that we don't want, to talk about aid. We want to talk about business. We want to talk about trade. Let us increase the trade. And it is unfortunate that even when Blinken came to Ethiopia just recently, he continues to parrot that narrative that we are giving food, we are helping them in democracy. And we don't need these things. We don't need help in these things. We have not asked them that we need help in these things. And that is the most ironic part of it. And we are telling them we want to trade. We want industries here. We want technology industries to be here. Why are they not telling um, people like Elon Musk to come and build a factory here in Africa and produce automobiles from here? Build his lithium battery factories in Africa. He should build them in Africa. This is the kind of conversation we want to have with the United States and Europe. Not conversations about human rights, conversations about climate change. We don't need them to teach us all these things. So I think that our relationship will continue to be strained, and China will continue to capitalize on this relationship. And the visits by the United States diplomats on the continent, even if they push the whole, United States government and they close it from the United States, they come to visit and convince Africans. As long as that relationship is not followed up by a substantial agenda, which is directed towards serious results, and not the just concluded summit, US Africa summit of $55 billion, which is empty, which is change, which is pocket change, which is nothing. If that relationship is not upgraded to that level, I think they can visit all they can, but there's not going to be any results from that. Thank you very much.
Thank you indeed, Kwame. I have a follow-up question on that, but just before I do that, I would, I would like to reflect on the previous one, regarding our discussion of the Saudi-Iran peace agreement, and another one country, major country that's going to be impacted in the Middle East is Israel, as you mentioned, and you brought to us, what the African Union took, the actions that they took to kick the Israeli diplomats from the AU. I did a reflection on that, and people, who are here, please go and watch it, and I want to know your comments on that. But the thing is, I slightly beg to differ from your view, because there are things that are affecting Africa directly, really directly, than meddling into Israel-Palestine conflict, and which is really not in a way that's kind of fair. For example, let's forget everything. Why not taking the same action on France, who is, on a daylight, thieving Africa, thieving the Western African countries, and is not stopping causing conflicts in the region? Why not doing that? What is it? Money behind it? It's because French, the French people or the French government sponsors much of the programs in the institution. What is the problem? I wish such action is taken, on issues or states that are directly affecting us, than Israel. I'm not supporting this one or that one. I do completely acknowledge the sentiments that we share with Palestine people, with what's happening on them, but it wasn't. It just made AU to lose that position of being a mediator, if you want to see, to be a fair player on the picture. By doing, I think it was just an embarrassment. And then on the other side, completely, being dominated by the Arab League of Nation, making a speech, the Palestine Prime Minister. Those are the keynote speakers or the guest speakers during. It wasn't fair. It wasn't fair in all rounded way, I would say. And yeah, that being said, you can come back to it if you have anything to a response to it. The second thing is, you said, how Saudi welcomed the Chinese president by itself, it sends a statement. Definitely, those things are not just done randomly, they have a message. And actually, it reminds me how Erdogan welcomed Abiy Ahmed, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, when he visited. It was really a never seen, I mean, it was magnificent, more than the agenda. I mean, what went viral was how Abiy Ahmed was welcome. I mean, not only the red carpet, the horses, everything. It was amazing, and that it went viral. It has been a topic on the mainstream media. So definitely Saudi Arabia is choosing its partner, and it's sending a message with that. So that being said, on the tour of different U.S. Officials, I mean, from the Secretary of State, from the First Lady, the Secretary of Treasury, the Vice President, and then I mean, these are going to happen, Vice President and the President himself. Then how can Africa take a lesson from the US Africa summit, which happened last December, which was completely on the agenda listed by the US? They went just and attended what have been prepared by the US. They didn't have any agenda. This time around, when they come to visit collectively, not individually, I mean, they're not going to visit 54 countries, but even I think there should be a message that they should send or deliver a collective message to this official. So what is the key lesson? Let's say that an AU official or countries, people from those countries who are going to get the visit from the vice president of and the president of US, what note should they take? Can you tell us, like, 1, 2, this is what Africa should do? Yeah, back to you, Kwame. Did we lose Kwame? He seems interrupted by the. Yeah, he might come back. I mean, this happens. It's a connection or network problem. Yeah, those of you who are here, please put your comments, questions, share your views on what we are discussing. We really would like to know. Yeah, we apologize for that. This happens a lot, unfortunately, in Africa, but that should not stop us from, bringing our brothers and sisters from the continent to discuss what's happening. It should be seen as a small thing. Welcome, Kwame, again.
Thank you. Sorry, the my network is disturbing a little bit.
So, did you hear me?
But I'm back.
Or is my
Yeah. So the I had the first question. Just the second question. Maybe you can
the second question is,
repeat
yeah.
a bit for me.
Okay, the second question is taking a lesson from what happened during the US Africa summit back in December, that our leaders going without an agenda of their own. now this time around it's not a summit, but still I think a collective message can be delivered by the leaders of a country, those who are going to receive the vice president and the president of the US. So if, let's say, that officials from AU or from those countries who are going to get the visit uh, will listen to this, and so like one to what should Africa do this time around, or it's just nothing. We should just welcome them and then say bye.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Malit. So let me first touch on the first point which you made about the issue of Israel. The African Union's position actually is majorly informed by history. Uh, that is why it has that position, like starting from the 1960s, when Africa was getting independence. Africa was all of it was very hostile towards colonialism, and and if you remember, in the 60s, Israel had started already, behaving like a colonialist country, the colonialist countries. And so that is why Africa consistently took that position. So whether it has a right to engage in the Middle East, uh, that one maybe is something which we can discuss another time. But majorly its position, and to zoom in, if you look at the members actually majorly who were opposed to this, Israel's being in, they are the ones who faced some of the most brutal, forms of colonialism on the continent, and that is South Africa, which was directly under apartheid. So for the memories of apartheid, are very fresh on the South African psyche. Especially the ANC, the government in South Africa, they are very fresh. And when you go to Algeria, which is also very resisted the this addition of Israel, you see that when even President Macron went to Algeria, they almost wanted to beat him, the civilian, because for them it was apartheid actually what France was also carrying out, what it was doing in Algeria. So these things for these countries are very fresh to them, and they happen to be powerful members. They happen to have a certain level of power within the African Union. So that is all for now I can say on that. And the resistance, why they are not resisting France's incursion into the western part of the continent of Africa. I think that is another issue which we need to analyze to great length for us to come to, I think, to sort of an agreeable conclusion on, on the position of the African Union itself, its policy towards the continent, and maybe the external world. I think that we can handle it for another day. So, or to go to the second question, you spoke about the visiting, diplomats from the Western world, and why we cannot also set an agenda since they are visiting us here. I think the difference is that because when they are coming here, it's sort of like a visit, so you cannot set an agenda for them, because it is not a summit, it is not an organized summit that we have also made our summit, maybe say Africa and the world summit, or maybe we say Africa and the US summit, and we decided to invite the United States here and tell them that this is what we want. Maybe that is something we can also come up with as Africans, or even we can advise the African Union that you need to organize these summits. That these people, they have been summoning you, US Africa Summit, Europe Africa Summit, UK Africa Summit, India Africa Summit, Turkey Africa Summit. So now you, the African Union, now you need also to turn it around and say Africa US Summit. Instead of having US Africa, now let us have Africa US, so that Africa can come first now, because everyone is putting their country first. UK Africa, US Africa. Now this time let us say Africa UK, Africa US, and let us have that summit in Addis Ababa, or let us have that summit either in Johannesburg or Pretoria, wherever we choose on the continent, and let us set our agenda and say, this is it. So maybe that's something, that is a suggestion, or that is something we need to write a letter about and deliver it either to the Pan-African Parliament or the African Union itself and African heads of state, that this is something worth thinking about. I think that would make, but for now, when they are coming here, they are coming as individuals, actually, who don't have power like the Secretary of State, apart from carrying the official position of the United States. He doesn't have a lot of power to make policy and say, give Africa this amount of money. But on top of that also, I don't think that the United States and these Europeans, they don't know what Africa wants, because they have never come here and asked that, what are your priorities? Like, for example, the US Africa Summit, how it happened, they didn't come and ask their counterparts, because they are inviting them that, what do you think should be at the agenda? Let us set the agenda together. What do you want to see on the agenda? What are your priorities? You see, if you have your priorities, and someone doesn't think that they qualify, to be on their invitation, then it makes you in some way think that they know our priorities. They know because we really don't think, I don't think that the United States and these people, they don't know what are the priorities for Africa. You see, when Blinken came to Ethiopia, he said, we agree with African solutions to African problems, and we agree with the position of the African Union to lead and come up with these own solutions. So they know what we want, that we don't want to be looked at as aid. We don't want your media to be, demonizing us and abusing us. Your racist media, you have to rein in. So these are positions which they know very well, because we have been saying it for a very long time, that your media, you have to rein in your media. US, Western world, rein in your media. They are not doing it. They know that they're supposed to do this. They are not doing it. We don't want aid. The era of aid is over. We want trade. They have not been doing this. They don't do this. When you go to a summit, US Africa Summit, people like Obama, they commit $36 billion. And after 4 years in power, you check, that $36 billion did not turn up. The commitments which President Barack Obama made did not turn up. So it's the same thing that we are going to see, is the same thing we are going to witness even now, that after Biden has gone out of power, another president has come. The $55 billion that was promised last year at the US Africa Summit, it will not be anywhere to be seen. The trade between the US and Africa will not have increased from the currently it is around, I think, $63 billion. So if you are saying that you have committed $55 billion, then our trade by the end of 4 years of Biden, it should increase to somewhere, $120 billion, somewhere there. 120 billion dollars. We should see $120 billion of trade between the US and Africa, if it is working. But unfortunately, the United States doesn't have that money. As you have seen, that right now, news is just coming out that its financial sector is facing problems. Banks are collapsing. And we said this in the past, that the United States doesn't have money. These are just empty promises. It doesn't have money to spend it on Africans. It doesn't have it. So the only thing that the United States has is to take care of its own selfish interests. So this is what we are seeing, that this relationship, for a long time we have been saying that it needs to be revised. The UN needs to be a democratic institution. The international institutions need to be hinged on the values of democracy, which you have been pirating around the world. But when we talk about these things, they don't want to do it. But then the same people who are preaching to us about democracy. So this makes them hypocrites, absolute hypocrites. You see, because they don't want the democracy itself on the international scale, or in the international institutions which govern the world. So this, I believe that Africans, we have seen all through, I think this, and that is why our position, instead of saying it, continuing to say it, Africans decide to keep quiet and look around the world and find more serious partners to work with. And that is where I think China has been, fitting in. That's where China has been taking advantage. And now they are coming again, running around and demonizing China. So this is what I am seeing.
Thank you. Yeah, no, thank you, Kwame. Really, that was a great one. Yeah, so with that, it brings us to the end of our session for tonight. And thank you very much, Kwame, for your usual input and analysis that you give us to look at things from the Pan-African perspective, which is really the main priority, the motivation, the intention. It's all about it. This is why we are here. All we care about is Africa. So I think coming up or an upcoming session will be next week. We will post. Please be a family, subscribe, and also go and sign those petition. I put it on the chat part, on the chat section. But then I will, once we are off, also I will pin it on the comment section. It's a call for an African unity. So yeah, please join us on that campaign. Hopefully, we are not losing Kwame. It seems that he has a problem of internet or connection. But yeah, thank you for being with us and everyone. And have a good evening. Have a good, a great weekend. So until next time, bye bye.